Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new video for the machine quilting block party. Today we're learning how to quilt our last block in this series, our Sun Explosion block. And you can click right here to find this quilt pattern at leahday.com. So we're going to be combining a lot of different designs that we've already learned and gotten a lot of practice with this year. We're going to do a lot of pebbling, more straight lines, and of course quilting that beautiful sun motif in the center. So let's get started learning how to quilt all of these designs step by step together. So I'm getting started right in the center of the block, and we have one last marked sun motif. And so I'm carefully quilting this circle right on the marked lines. And this is one of those things, if you ever question whether you should mark something or not, and the symbol is something that you really want to have finished, just exactly right, exactly perfectly, then that is a no-brainer. If you want it to finish and have it look exactly right, then it has to be marked. Go on ahead, take the time, put it on your quilt so that way it comes out exactly the way you want. Now I know in the opposite corner from this square, I had put a little spiral in the center, so I think I'm going to do that for this one too. And this is a great way of hiding any wiggles or wobbles. If your initial circle wasn't exactly perfect and wasn't exactly on the lines, well then you can just fill the space in with a spiral. And so I'm working my way into the space. I'm leaving space for myself to get back out, and I come to a point, and now I'm just going to quilt right through the middle of the space that I've left. So it's a fun process, and it's something that I struggled with when I first started quilting. I really couldn't see how to leave the space open, and what I started thinking of really was just practice, but eventually I started saying, oh, okay, I need to leave double the size of the spiral going in so I can quilt right through the middle of it, working my way back out. So I think that looks really good. I'm really pleased with it. So now we're going to start working on the flames. I just rotate it around here a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. And this is super simple as well. We're just going to connect with those lines, wiggle up to a point, and stop, and then wiggle back. And the reason why I'm emphasizing that stop is that helps you with direction changes. If you want a nice crisp point there and a solid direction change, then really think about it. Stop, needle in the down position, reposition your hands a bit, and then start quilting again away from that point. Can run into trouble when you kind of stay in place and have the needle going up and down as you kind of think about where you're going to go next. That's where you get in trouble, and that can cause something I call hesitation knots on the front or the back of the quilt, because the needle's going up and down, it's continuing to stitch, but your hands aren't pushing the quilt. So you have to keep everything moving, or if your hands stop, make sure your needle stops. Make sure to take your foot off the gas so your machine stops too. So you can see I'm just wiggling up, coming to that point, giving a little pause there, and then wiggling back down. You certainly could stitch these wiggly flame shapes freehand if you wanted to. If you wanted to have all of your sun shapes to look kind of have their own unique bent to them, that certainly would be a-okay. But I really wanted them all to look identical, so I marked them all. Once the marks are washed out, they're all going, each corner is going to have a different sun symbol, or actually I should say the same sun symbol in each of the corners of the quilt. So I think that's going to look really good. The next part of the block involves a lot of stitching in the ditch and straight line quilting. So I've switched to my walking foot because that'll make it easier, and I've moved my Supreme slider off the feed dogs so that way I can connect with those feed dogs and allow the machine to feed the quilt forward. So what I've done so far is I have stitched in the ditch around the yellow square in the center, and then connected with the ditches around the orange triangles. So all of those ditches have been stitched. And then now I'm quilting, travel stitching along those lines and knocking out all of the straight line quilting in these triangles. So let me show you how it works. We're going to travel stitch right in the ditch, get right up to a line, rotate the quilt, and stitch right down that line. And you'll notice that I can speed up as I have a nice long line to stitch, but anytime I need to change directions, you want to slow down and kind of anticipate that so you don't overshoot it. If you do overshoot it, there is a way that you can save it. It's something that I use quite a lot, and that is to rotate my hand wheel backwards. You can see here, I'm rotating my hand wheel backwards. It just lifts the needle and takes out that last stitch. Now, that doesn't work for every single machine, but it works for mine, so you'll need to test it and see if it works for your machine. I've heard from some quilters that have mentioned that backing up a stitch like that can sometimes cause their machine to gag and bird's nest and make a big nasty knot on the back of the quilt. So just watch out for that. You know, it really is something that's going to be machine specific, but you can avoid it simply by slowing down as you near any direction change. So coming up here, I'm going to stitch this line, and then I know I'm about to change direction. So I just take my foot off the gas and figure out how much I have to press on the foot pedal just to get it to make one stitch. So here I can just do a little tap of the foot pedal, and that makes it take one stitch at a time. And it's just getting to know your machine really well to know how to make it do that. It's really that simple. So I'm coming up, I've got this one last little triangle, finish up in the ditch. And so from here, I'm just going to stitch in the ditch down, turn this corner, and start filling in this triangle with more straight lines. And that'll be that whole center area knocked out. So next, we're going to move out to these outer triangles. We're going to stitch them in the ditch, filling up with the lines the exact same way, but I'm going to show you how to chain them together so you have much fewer thread breaks as you work not only filling up the corner red triangles, but also these orange triangles as well. So I've pulled up thread in this area, the perimeter between the center block and the border, and this is how you can chain these triangles together. As you stitch in the ditch along this line, you can go into the triangle, fill it up with lines, escape from the triangle, go back to that line, stitch down, hit the corner triangle, do the exact same thing. So let me show you how it's going to work. I'm going to start by stitching in the ditch right along that line between the center block and the border. And there are some seam allowances here, so I have to kind of watch out for that anytime I run up against, especially these flying geese units here on the sides. There's going to be an extra layer of fabric because we had some shadow through, so there's an extra layer of fabric there. That means there's going to be more seam allowances as well, so just watch out for these spaces. Okay, now I'm going to rotate. I'm going to start stitching right in the ditch into that triangle. And I'm using a pretty puffy batting, so I'm really doing a lot of work here with my hands. Might not look like it, but I'm actively mushing down with my hands, squeezing outwards with my fingers, pulling down with my thumbs, and that's keeping the whole block nice and flat. So I'm going to stitch that corner and rotate again. And don't hesitate to roll your block up if you need to. You know, give it a good squish, get it in control so that way you can easily rotate your block around. So now I'm stitching right along the bottom edge of the triangle. And this is where we're going to start stitching into the triangle and knocking out those lines. This is what I call ditching and filling. As I'm stitching in the ditch, I can go on ahead and fill the unit, that space that I've just stitched around. I haven't even completed it yet, but it doesn't really matter. I'm here in this line. I don't want to have to travel stitch back down here. Instead, I'm just going to go on ahead and knock out all the lines, and then I'll get back to ditching. So I'm just going to stitch these straight lines, making sure stay right on the marks. You could, of course, use the edge of your walking foot as a guide if you wanted to just not have to mark necessarily. If you wanted to just be able to kind of fly through this, then you could line up the edges of the triangle with your walking foot instead. It would probably give you a slightly different spacing on your lines, but that would certainly be something that's open to you and might be faster to get started with and not have to sit there and mark the block. So you can see I'm just stitching right along these, and to get to each next line, I'm just travel stitching right back in that ditch. There is a good bit of rotation here. It's nice that our blocks are only about 14 inches, simply because it makes it that much faster to be able to get in this area and roll it up. It's not too bulky on the quilt, on the machine. I've got a few last little lines here. And it's just careful stitching. Slow and steady wins the race. And it might feel a little annoying to do all of these tiny little direction changes, but I really like it. It's kind of one of those things that when I go into a block like this, I'm just like, all right, it's going to be a little bit of a workout, but it's going to be a fun workout. So there we go. Now we filled in all the lines and I can get back to stitching the triangle in the ditch. So here I'm just going to work back to that corner. I overshot it a little bit, so I'm going to use my trick. I'm going to back up a stitch and get right back in that ditch and stitch along it. So by doing it this way, you can stitch in the ditch, you can get the block secure while also filling in the lines without having an extra thread break. If you were just stitching each triangle individually, then you'd break thread between all of them, and that would just be a little bit extra time, a little bit extra hassle to sit there and have to tie up all those threads. So here we go. I'm going to take out all my pins in this corner, and this corner is going to work the exact same way. So I'm going to first stitch the diagonal line and going ahead and knock out all the lines first, and then I'll finish up the stitching in the ditch all the way around the back side of it. So here I'm going to go, and here's another thing. You could go ahead and stitch just to the center, but you're going to leave some gaps here as you quilt these other lines. So I go ahead and stitch all the way down to the biggest set of lines whenever I'm stitching this way. That way I'm sure that the entire, actually I'm going to go on ahead and complete the full ditch and get to that line. There we go. Now I'll rotate back and I'll fill in this space completely. And that's just to guarantee and make sure that all of those lines are going to get hit and the ditches are not going to leave any gaps. So I'm going to fill in this space real quickly and I'll get back to ditching. So I'm finishing up this last little triangle, and now I'm going to stitch in the ditch right back to the point of the triangle. Got off just a little bit, so I'm going to back up and make sure I'm right in the ditch. And then I'm just travel stitching right along that line. I'm going to get back to that point. And now I'm back in the perimeter ditch. I'm just going to stitch on down. So by doing it this way, we're able to chain all of these triangles together, no extra thread breaks. I'm pretty much doing the exact same thing through every single one, so it is a repetitive motion, and I always think that that makes it a little easier because your brain, you do one of them really well, and your brain is just kind of like, okay, wash and repeat. Just repeat the same set of steps, repeat the same process over and over again, and I think that always makes it easier. So now it's time to fill in the background of the block, and I'm quilting it with a design called Underwater Rocks. Basically, this is messy pebbling. So I'm going to start with a circle, and then I'm just going to spin around it with 2 or 3 messy echoes, just like that. And then I can travel stitch or just, kind of messy echo away to another circle, form that shape, and spin around it a few times. And you can see how this really hides your mistakes. You end up seeing the nice circle shape and not really the imperfect wobbles or bobbles that might be happening as you form that design. Now, because we have so many repetitions, so many stitches around and around, you want to make your circles as big as possible. So here you can see I'm swinging out and making a really large circle. And I'm allowing those echoes to be as messy as I need them to be. Sometimes those lines are 1/8 of an inch or more apart. That's a-okay. That's kind of the point of the design. Now, I decided to match thread with this, but it also looks really cool when you contrast thread. We played with this a little bit. I think it was block 7 or block 8 that we played around with Underwater Rocks, and we contrasted thread. So definitely feel welcome to contrast thread if you want to. It'll look really funky on your quilt. The one thing to watch out for with this design, and you can probably tell by now, it is very fast. It's very natural feeling, and that means that you might end up moving your hands really fast on the quilt surface. If you notice that your stitches are getting a little bit too big, then that means that you just need to slow down your hands. They're really happy forming the design, but maybe moving just a little too fast. So watch out for that as you're quilting it. The last step to this block is to fill in the borders with these wiggly flame shapes. We've used these in every single block in the quilt, and I really like quilting them in orange thread so that way they stand out nicely, and they're going to look great when we connect all the blocks together. So it's just wiggly flame shapes dot to dot, and then I've got a triangle here in the corner. And I like to mark the whole triangle just so my straight lines end up nice and straight. With the dot to dot, basically I just marked the points of the triangles, of the flames. So I'm just going to wiggle to one point and then wiggle my way back. It's really simple. It's that same kind of bouncy movement that we had with our sun shape in the center of the block. So just a wiggle in, and if you need to, slow down, come to a nice sharp point, and then wiggle back, and try not to overshoot that line and stitch into the ditch. I'm just coming right up to it. So that's it for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed learning how to quilt the Sun Explosion block. You can click right here to find this quilt pattern at leahday.com. Of course, this is the last block for Sunshine Surprise, but that doesn't mean it's the end of this fun block party. The party will continue next year. We have a brand new quilt along that is starting in January 2017, and the theme is flowers. So here's a little sneak peek of our first block, and the quilt is called Flower Festival. It's going to be a really fun combination of flower blocks, and it's going to work exactly the same way as this year's quilt along. We're going to learn how to piece the quilts on the first Monday of the month, and then how to quilt them on the second Monday of the month. So it's going to be a really fun quilt along, very interactive. We always have a really awesome, supportive Facebook group to go along with these quilt alongs. So I definitely hope that you'll join in the fun and learn how to piece and quilt with me in 2017. So definitely check that out at leahday.com. And until next time, let's go quilt.